India abstained on a resolution at the United Nations over Israel-Palestine conflict. There's been a huge furor, with usual suspects accusing India of supporting violence, as they claim, and of turning anti-Palestine in India's foreign policy approach. But is that really the fact? Let me break it down for you. At the United Nations, India had said, and I quote it here from the statement, the terror attacks in Israel on 7th October were shocking and they deserve condemnation. Our thoughts are also with those who have been taken hostages. We call for immediate and unconditional release of those hostages. Terrorism is a malignancy and knows no borders, nationality or race. Adding to this, now listen in to what India's Ambassador Yojana Patel, Deputy Permanent Representative, said about the humanitarian crisis that is unfolding in Gaza.
Casualties in the ongoing conflict in Gaza are a telling, serious and continuing concern. Civilians, especially women and children, are paying with their lives. This humanitarian crisis needs to be addressed. We welcome the international community's de-escalation efforts and delivery of humanitarian assistance to the people of Gaza. India, too, has contributed to this effort.
In this explanation or vote at the emergency session, the ambassador also highlighted India's long-standing position of supporting a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine's existence. India supports dialogue and said exactly that at the United Nations. So why did it abstain from the vote? India, in fact, supported a proposed amendment to a resolution at the UNGA's emergency session. Canada had placed an amendment to the resolution, which was proposed by Jordan, that called for an immediate truce in Israel-Palestine conflict. Canada called for a clear condemnation of Hamas and for the terror attacks on Israel that occurred on 7th October. The amendment also sought a condemnation of the abduction of civilians, not just Israelis but other nationalities too, who continue to be held captive in the Gaza Strip by Hamas, including toddlers and little infant babies. It called, as an amendment, for the insertion of a paragraph in the resolution stating that the UNGA unequivocally rejects and condemns the terror attacks by Hamas that took place in Israel on 7th October 2023, while calling for an immediate release of the hostages. Now, if you remember, New Delhi and Ottawa have had a political diplomatic showdown over the Khalistani issue in the past few weeks. But India was actually among 88 countries who voted in favor of this amendment by Canada, while 55 voted against and 23 abstained even in this. Sadly, so this did not get the two-thirds support and the amendment could not pass. Details for you. All Arab nations voted against this amendment to condemn Hamas. Only Tunisia was the exception among those nations. The resolution was titled Protection of Civilians and Upholding Legal and Humanitarian Obligations. And Arab nations did not want condemnation of the Hamas brutality on civilians in Israel. When the final vote happened, without this amendment of condemning Hamas, India decided to abstain. Besides India, countries that abstained included Australia, Canada, Germany, Japan, Ukraine, and the United Kingdom. Are you saying all these countries wanted violence to continue on innocent civilians in Gaza, or they wanted to ensure a record is set that terror actions like on 7th October do not get a free pass when mentioned in the archives of the United Nations? Here's some background for you. In 2018, India voted in support of a UNHRC resolution to launch an investigation into Israel's offensive on Gaza. In 2015, India abstained from voting on a resolution on Palestine adopted at the UN rights body. In 2017, India was among 128 countries that voted in favor of a United Nations General Assembly resolution rejecting former US President Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital. So you see that India has taken different positions depending on the clarity of the resolution, never favoring only Israel, as some may want you to believe, and more toward a non-aligned movement that India has followed for long. In 2018, Prime Minister Modi visited Israel. He also, the same year, visited Palestine too and signed Memorandum of Understanding with Project Assistance for Palestine, both in Gaza and for West Bank. India has always stood for humanitarian support for Palestine, even at the United Nations, while it has been vocal also in diplomatic support to Israel, specifically in the past few years, but never at the cost of Palestinian people. India's permanent mission to the United Nations in November 2022 actually gave out a very clear message in support of people of Palestine. Reading a message from Prime Minister Modi in that letter, it states, and I quote, India's ties with friendly people of Palestine are in common history. We have always supported Palestinian people in social and economic development with dignity and with self-reliance, and that India has been at the forefront of extending development assistance continuously for building schools, hospitals, technopark, organizations for women empowerment, all in Palestine. Importantly, even before this whole resolution and the controversy that followed, Prime Minister Modi had spoken with Jordan's King Abdullah, sharing concerns regarding terrorism, violence and loss of civilian lives, referring to concerted efforts needed for an early resolution of the security and humanitarian situation in West Asia. India also sent humanitarian aid recently, remember, including medical supplies that are urgently needed, specifically in the hospitals in Gaza. Prime Minister Modi had spoken to President Mahmoud Abbas also since the war started, ensuring that he's aware of India's support and solidarity to the people of Palestine. Remember that diplomacy is layered. It often looks at historical alliances, not just new emerging issues. It also looks at strategic partnerships that are emerging. And that is why India is ensuring to toe the correct line for now in Israel-Palestine conflict, which is to always stand by innocent civilians, stand by people, and ensure that there is no support to terrorism.
India's foreign policy as far as Israel and Palestine is the subject of a great deal of debate. It reminds me of what happened when India took an independent line as far as Russia and Ukraine were concerned. It came under huge criticism, but remember who had the last laugh. India's foreign policy this time as far as Israel is concerned is the very same foreign policy that we've had all along, but tempered with a recognition that terror must be terror. It cannot have any caveats. It cannot have any disclaimers of the kind that many countries, including the United States, are putting down. India supports Israel. India shows solidarity with Israel. India calls it terror without any ifs and buts. Prime Minister Modi's tweet was among the first unambiguous, unequivocal, unwavering words about what happened to Israel, and it is much appreciated here in Israel. I've spoken to several people in the Palestinian territories, and they also understand that there was no way that India could have done anything else. They don't feel resentful about it one single bit. That the reason for that, of course, is that India officially supports statehood for Palestine. It officially supports a mutually acceptable, peaceful and sustainable two-state solution. It has always supported Palestine. India has many government projects in the Palestinian de facto capital of Ramallah, which I've been reporting from. Prime Minister Modi was the first Indian Prime Minister ever to visit Ramallah and meet with the Palestinian president. This was in 2016, setting off a new sort of paradigm in relations between India and Palestine. So those who see a contradiction or a hypocrisy in India expressing unwavering solidarity with Israel as far as Hamas is concerned, and yet supporting Palestine's right to statehood and recognizing the Palestinian struggle, are completely wrong. There is no contradiction in that foreign policy. This is a policy that is predicated on facts. This is a policy that is predicated on how India has refuse to be drawn into, especially vitiated conflicts of this kind, because it believes it can play a much more constructive role if it listens to both sides. And that is what India has done as far as Israel and Palestine are concerned. Remember, and this is not just in policy and speech, this is also in action. When it comes to the United Nations, a great deal of controversy was over India's abstention at the recent UN resolution proposed by Jordan for a humanitarian pause. But that abstention is neither new, nor is it unprecedented. India has abstained in the past when it comes to Israeli resolutions. It has opposed resolutions against Palestine. It has opposed resolutions when they've been against Israel as well, because it believes that as a country with an independent foreign policy, aligning one way or the other in a place like West Asia is detrimental not just to Indian interests, but also to interests of countries on the ground.